My wife used to say that I was the last person on earth who still trusted photographs. She meant it as a compliment. She died before I found the image that proved her wrong. I came across it the way most people do, by accident, late at night, following a thread of links that began somewhere reasonable and ended somewhere else entirely. A forum post, no author listed, a single image attached, and beneath it, in plain text, a caption that has since become impossible to verify or erase. Mermaid found, 1897. The creature in the photograph is not what you are imagining. There is nothing romantic about it. It is skeletal, desiccated, its upper body humanoid in the way that a medical illustration is humanoid, accurate, clinical, stripped of everything that might invite sympathy. The head is too small, the eye sockets are hollow, and where the body should end, it continues, scaled and finned, in a transformation so seamless it looks less like fabrication than like fact. I have spent my career distinguishing between those two things. I was not prepared for how difficult that distinction would become. The photograph first crossed my desk in January of this year. A colleague forwarded it with a simple question. Have you seen this before? I had. Not in archives or academic collections, but in the same place most people encounter it. Buried in a Reddit thread about maritime mysteries. Shared without commentary, presented as self-evident proof of something impossible. The image quality is poor, but not so degraded that details disappear. The creature measures perhaps 4 feet from head to tail tip, though scale is difficult to establish without reference points. The upper torso is emaciated to the point of appearing mummified. Every rib is visible. The arms are thin, ending in what appear to be hands, though the resolution makes individual fingers difficult to confirm. The skin texture is rough, almost bark-like in places, with darker patches that could be decomposition or simply shadow. The face is the most disturbing element. It is humanoid enough to provoke recognition. 2 eye sockets, a nasal cavity, a mouth. But the proportions are wrong. The skull is elongated. The jaw protrudes slightly. The eye sockets are too large, too dark, creating an expression of permanent anguish or shock. There is no hair artebrio visible, no external ears. The neck is long and thin, connecting to shoulders that slope downward at an unnatural angle. And then the tail. It begins at what would be the hips, transitioning so smoothly that there is no visible seam or joint. The scales are clearly defined, overlapping in regular patterns. The tail itself is thick near the body, tapering toward a bifurcated fin that splays outward on the sand. The coloration appears mottled, darker on top, lighter underneath, consistent with counter-shading patterns found in actual fish species. What makes this image so compelling is not beauty, but plausibility. It does not look like a movie prop or an obvious fabrication. It looks like a biological specimen, something that lived and died and was deposited on a beach by tide and circumstance. The decay is consistent. The anatomy, while impossible, is internally coherent. If mermaids existed and one washed ashore, this is what the corpse would look like. I've seen this photograph on dozens of websites. Sometimes the caption includes a location, found in the Philippines, or discovered on a Florida beach. Sometimes it specifies 1897, sometimes late 1800s, sometimes no date at all. Occasionally, someone adds context, a story about fishermen, a claim about government confiscation, a reference to suppressed records. But these additions are always third-hand, always unsourced, always changing depending on who is sharing the image. The photograph has no metadata, no photographer credit, no museum catalog number, no newspaper clipping attached to verify its origin. It exists as a free-floating artifact, stripped of everything except the image itself and the persistent claim that it is old, that it is real, that it is proof. I have worked with historical photographs for 40 years. I have authenticated Civil War daguerreotypes, identified anonymous portraits from the 1850s, traced the provenance of images that passed through 5 generations before landing in archives. I know how documentation works. I know the paper trails that legitimate historical artifacts leave behind. Photographs this significant do not exist in isolation. They do not appear from nowhere with no record, no witness, no chain of custody connecting them to the moment of capture. And yet, this image persists. It circulates. It convinces people. The quality suggests analog photography, grain structure, tonal range, the kind of wear consistent with a print that has been copied and recopied over decades. But those characteristics can be simulated. The composition is too perfect. The creature is centered, fully visible, positioned for maximum clarity. Field photographs from the 1890s were rarely this clean. Cameras were bulky, exposure times were long, unexpected discoveries were documented hastily with whatever angle was available. This looks staged, deliberate. I began my investigation with the assumption that if this photograph was genuine, someone would have written about it. A discovery of this magnitude in 1897 would have been international news. It would have reached scientific societies, been published in journals, been debated in newspapers. I searched archives. I combed through digitized periodicals from the 1890s. I contacted colleagues who specialize in Victorian-era cryptozoology, claims and sideshow history. Nothing. No record of a mermaid discovery in 1897. No mention in any contemporary source. The photograph appears in the digital record only recently, the last 15 years, primarily the last decade. Before the internet, it did not exist. That absence told me everything. I needed to know about what this image was not. But it told me nothing about what it actually was, or where it came from. To answer those questions, I had to stop looking backward into history and start looking sideways into the present. In 1897, photography was not new, but it was not yet ubiquitous. Field photography, the kind required to document a specimen on a remote beach, required equipment, expertise, and intention. A camera, glass plates or film, chemical processing capabilities, and someone trained to operate the apparatus. This was not a snapshot taken on impulse. If this photograph existed in 1897, it was the product of deliberate documentation. A discovery of a mermaid corpse would have been the most significant zoological find of the century. It would have mobilized scientific institutions immediately. The Smithsonian, the British Museum, academic naturalists, maritime biologists, all would have descended on the location. The specimen would have been preserved, transported, studied, dissected, catalogued. Photographs would have been taken from multiple angles, with measurement references, in controlled settings. Reports would have been published. Debates would have erupted in scientific journals. None of that happened. There is no record in the Smithsonian archives, no mention in the journals of the Zoological Society of London, no correspondence among naturalists discussing a mermaid specimen, no museum acquisitions records, no catalog entries. The institutional memory of 1897 contains no mermaid. I searched newspaper databases spanning the 1890s, Chronicling America, the Library of Congress Digital Archives, British Newspaper Archive, Australian Historical Papers. I used search terms for mermaid, sea creature, fish woman, marine discovery, anything that might have captured the story if it had been reported. I found dozens of mermaid references, but they were all hoaxes, sideshow exhibits, or retellings of folklore. Nothing matched the photograph. The absence of coverage is not simply a gap, it is a void. In the 1890s, newspapers printed stories about far less significant discoveries. Unusual fish, deformed animals, strange objects washed ashore. These were regular content. A mermaid would have been front-page news globally. The silence is not evidence of suppression. It is evidence that the event never occurred. Then there is the photograph itself, examined not for what it shows, but for how it was made. Photographic technology in 1897 was advanced but limited. Field photography typically used large format cameras with glass plate negatives. These cameras were heavy, required tripods, and had slow shutter speeds. Outdoor photography in natural light was possible, but capturing fine detail required careful exposure management. The resulting images had characteristic grain structures, tonal ranges, and contrast profiles specific to the film and chemistry used. The 1897 Mermaid photograph has grain. Yes, it has the appearance of age, but the grain pattern is inconsistent with period glass plates. The tonal range is too smooth. The highlights are not blown out in the way overexposed 19th century beach photographs typically are. The shadow detail is too well preserved. The image looks like a modern photograph that has been degraded, run through filters, artificially aged, given the texture of antiquity without the actual characteristics of century-old photographic processes. I sent a high-resolution copy to a colleague who specializes in photographic forensics. Her analysis identified compression artifacts consistent with digital processing. She found no evidence of analog to digital scanning artifacts that would be present if this were a photograph of a photograph. The image, she concluded, was likely born digital, then artificially distressed to appear old. This did not tell me what the image showed. It only confirmed what it was not, a Victorian-era field photograph. I expanded my search methodology. If the photograph was not from 1897, when did it first appear? I used reverse image search tools, tracking the earliest online instances. The trail went cold around 2010. Before that, nothing. The photograph simply did not exist in any accessible archive, database, or collection prior to approximately 15 years ago. That timeline mattered. It meant the photograph was not a rediscovered historical artifact that had been sitting in someone's attic for a century. It was a recent creation, introduced into circulation within the last decade and a half, and retroactively assigned to 1897. The question became, who created it and why? I began searching not for historical records, but for contemporary sources. Artists, effects specialists, taxidermists, sculptors, anyone working in biological fabrication or sideshow-style curiosities. I searched museum exhibit design studios, special effects companies, Halloween prop creators. I looked at artist portfolios, Etsy, shops, DeviantArt galleries, and then buried in a forum thread about sideshow gaffes and historical hoaxes, someone mentioned a name, Juan Cabana. He was described as an artist in Florida who created cryptid specimens and biological curiosities. His work was inspired by historical sideshow traditions, the kind of fabricated creatures that had been sold to collectors and exhibited in dime museums for centuries. I found his website. I found photographs of his sculptures. And there, among images of jackalopes and Fiji mermaids and Jenny Hannovers, I found the creature from the photograph. Not a century-old specimen, not a zoological discovery, a modern sculpture created by a living artist, photographed and documented as part of his portfolio of speculative natural history. The 1897 Mermaid was not from 1897. It was from the 21st century. And the man who made it had never intended for it to be mistaken for anything real. I need to tell you about August 1842, when New York City became obsessed with a corpse. Concert Hall stood at the corner of Broadway and Grand Street. P.T. Barnum owned it. For weeks that summer, thousands of people lined up outside, paid 25 cents each, and filed past a glass case containing what Barnum called the Fiji Mermaid. It wasn't beautiful. That's the first thing witnesses noted. The creature measured roughly 3 feet from its wizened head to the tip of its fishtail. The upper body appeared to be that of a small primate. Later analysis confirmed it was an orangutan or juvenile monkey. Leathered skin stretched over a grimacing skull. The arms were thin, skeletal, frozen in a position that suggested it had died in distress. Where the torso ended, fish scales began. The tail itself came from a large salmon, attached so skillfully that the seam was nearly invisible. It looked ancient. It looked real. Most importantly, it looked exactly like what people expected a dead mermaid to look like. Barnum understood something fundamental about human belief. We don't want our mysteries to be beautiful. We want them to be strange enough to be plausible. The grotesque carries more weight than the sublime. He didn't simply display the mermaid. He manufactured controversy around it. Weeks before the exhibition opened, newspapers across New York began receiving letters from a Dr. J. Griffin, identified as an agent of the Lyceum of Natural History in London. Dr. Griffin had supposedly acquired the specimen in the Fiji Islands and was bringing it to America for scientific examination. The letters described the creature in careful detail. They used precise anatomical language. They acknowledged skepticism while insisting on the specimen's authenticity. Dr. Griffin didn't exist. The Lyceum of Natural History in London didn't exist. Both were Barnum's inventions. When the exhibition opened, Barnum hired actual scientists to examine the specimen publicly. Some declared it genuine. Others called it an obvious fake. Newspapers ran competing editorials. Naturalists wrote heated letters debating the possibility of hybrid marine mammals. Crowds grew larger each day. The controversy was the point. Barnum had learned that doubt itself could be profitable. Every article calling the mermaid a hoax prompted 3 more people to visit and judge for themselves. Every scientist who examined it, whether they believed or not, added legitimacy to the spectacle. I'm telling you this because Barnum's Fiji Mermaid established a template that has never really disappeared. It created a cultural expectation for what a real mermaid should look like. Not the classical siren with flowing hair and beauty that could lure sailors to their deaths. Not the romantic vision of Hans Christian Andersen, published just 7 years earlier. Instead, a mermaid should be grotesque, desiccated, ambiguous. Something that looked like it had washed up from genuine ocean depths and died badly on some foreign shore. The creature in the 1897 photograph follows this template precisely. Barnum toured the Fiji Mermaid for years. It appeared at his American Museum in New York. It traveled to Boston, Philadelphia, Charleston. When his museum burned in 1865, the mermaid was destroyed. But by then, it didn't matter. Dozens of similar specimens had appeared. Barnum had proven the market existed. He'd purchased his mermaid from a sailor in Boston who claimed to have acquired it in Calcutta. That sailor had likely purchased it from Japanese fishermen. The creation of fake mermaids had been a cottage industry in maritime Asia for centuries. Specimens crafted specifically for European and American collectors who wanted proof that legends were real. By the time photography became widely accessible in the 1880s and 1890s, the image of the grotesque mermaid corpse was already fixed in the public imagination. Anyone wanting to create a convincing mermaid, whether as a physical specimen or a photograph, knew exactly what it needed to look like. Barnum died in 1891. 6 years later, Someone supposedly took a photograph of a mermaid that could have come directly from his exhibition catalog. That timeline matters. The question isn't whether people in 1897 would have believed such a creature could exist. Barnum had already proven they would. The question is whether the photograph actually dates from that year at all, or whether someone much later understood what Barnum had understood, that the grotesque is always more convincing than the beautiful. There's a technical term in the world of sideshows and curiosity exhibitions. They call it a gaff. A gaff is a fabricated object designed to appear as something impossible. Not a simple fake, but a constructed impossibility. Crafted carefully enough that even skeptical observers have to pause and consider whether the laws of nature might have exceptions after all. The art of the gaff is older than photography, older than Barnum, older than America itself. Walk through any Renaissance-era cabinet of curiosities, and you'd find them. Basilisk skeletons that were actually modified lizards. Dragon specimens constructed from ray carcasses. Mermaid bones that had never belonged to any single creature. European nobility paid substantial sums for these objects, displaying them alongside genuine natural history specimens with no clear distinction between the two. The most common gaff, produced for centuries across Europe and Asia, was the Jenny Hanover. Take a skate or a ray, flat cartilaginous fish with wing-like pectoral fins. Dry it carefully in the sun or smoke it over low heat. As it desiccates, manipulate the flesh and cartilage into new shapes. The fins can be folded to resemble wings. The mouth can be carved and positioned to create an expression of malevolence or surprise. The tail can be curled. What emerges looks like no fish at all, but rather like a small dragon, a demon, an angel. Sailors sold these by the hundreds in European port cities from the 1500s through the 1800s. Merchants displayed them in apothecary shops. The church sometimes purchased them as proof of demonic entities. Scientists occasionally studied them before recognizing the deception. The technique required skill, but not exceptional artistry. It required understanding how organic materials behave as they dry, how cartilage can be reshaped, how careful stitching becomes invisible as flesh contracts. Most importantly, it required understanding what people expected monsters to look like. Japanese fishermen perfected a parallel tradition. They created ningyo, mermaid specimens constructed from fish bodies and monkey torsos. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. They used real animal parts exclusively, selecting species whose bones and musculature could be persuaded into new configurations. A fish tail, a monkey's upper body and arms, sometimes a skull from a smaller primate. Wire armatures inside to maintain poses. The seams stitched with such precision that even close examination couldn't always identify where one animal ended and another began. These weren't meant to deceive scientists. They were folk art, spiritual objects, curiosities for temples and wealthy collectors. But when Dutch and Portuguese traders began purchasing them in the 1600s and bringing them back to Europe, the context disappeared. What had been acknowledged craft became presented as natural history. By the Victorian era, the production of gaffs had become industrialized in certain regions. Factories in parts of Asia produced mermaid specimens by the dozen for export to American and European markets. Quality varied. Some were obvious fakes even to untrained eyes. Others were masterworks that fooled naturalists who should have known better. The demand was constant because the appeal was universal. People wanted physical proof that the world contained more than what science had cataloged. They wanted to believe that somewhere in the unexplored ocean depths, or in the jungles not yet mapped, creatures from mythology still survived. A well-made gaff gave them permission to believe. I'm explaining this because when you look at the creature in the 1897 photograph, You're looking at something that follows every convention of the traditional fish monkey, mermaid gaff. The emaciated primate torso. The carefully constructed transition from flesh to scales. The positioning that suggests death rather than life. The overall aesthetic of something that has been pulled from the ocean and dried on a beach. If this photograph is genuine, if it truly dates from 1897, then it's almost certainly a photograph of a gaff, not a photograph of an actual mermaid. The tradition was widespread. The technique was well established. Any coastal town with skilled fishermen would have had someone capable of producing such a specimen. But there's a second possibility, one that the digital age has made increasingly common. The photograph itself might be the gaff, not a picture of a fabricated creature, but a fabricated picture designed to circulate as evidence. A modern creation that mimics both the aesthetic of a Victorian photograph and the appearance of a Victorian-era sideshow specimen. To determine which, we need to find the source. We need to trace this image backward through time and discover not what it shows, but where it actually came from. That investigation leads to Florida, to an artist's studio, and to a creative project that succeeded far beyond its creator's intention. The search for the truth behind the 1897 Mermaid does not end in Victorian archives or maritime museums. It doesn't conclude with yellowed newspaper clippings or forgotten scientific journals. Instead, the trail leads somewhere unexpected, to the present day, to a workshop in Florida, to an artist who builds creatures that never existed from the remains of things that did. His name is Juan Cabana. Cabana is not a cryptozoologist. He's not a hoaxer in the traditional sense, not someone trying to convince the world that mermaids swim in our oceans. He is an artist who specializes in creating what he calls found biological curiosities. Specimens that look as though they washed ashore from an alternate timeline, a world where the myths turned out to be true. The creature in the photograph is his work, not a relic from 1897, but a sculpture created in the 21st century. I should clarify what that means. When I say sculpture, I don't mean plaster and paint. Cabana's mermaids are not fiberglass props or latex models. They are constructed from organic materials, real flesh, real bone, actual animal parts carefully assembled and preserved. The result is something that occupies an unsettling space between taxidermy and art, between specimen and fabrication. The skin you see in the photograph, that leathered, desiccated surface stretched over protruding ribs, is of fish skin. The bones are real bones, sourced from various animals. The tail is built from actual fish carcasses. Cabana uses steel armatures to create the internal structure, then layers organic material over the framework until the creature takes shape. The process is painstaking, technical, and results in something that photographs with an authenticity no digital manipulation could achieve. His inspiration traces directly back to the sideshow waifs we discussed earlier, the Fiji mermaid, the Jenny Hannovers, the monkeyfish hybrids that sailors sold in port towns centuries ago. Cabana has studied these historical specimens extensively. He understands their construction, their cultural function, their aesthetic. His work is a deliberate continuation of that tradition, filtered through contemporary art practice. But there's a crucial difference. Barnum presented his mermaid as genuine. The sailors who stitched together monkey torsos and fish tails intended to deceive. Cabana does not make that claim. He exhibits his work as art, as speculative biology, as objects from an imagined natural history. His pieces appear in galleries and art shows. He documents his process. He is transparent about what his creations are. The specific piece that appears in the viral photograph is one of several merman and siren sculptures he has created over the years. Each one is slightly different, variations on a theme, experiments in form and decomposition. Some are more skeletal, others retain more flesh. Some have longer tails, different facial structures, varying degrees of decay. The one in the photograph became famous by accident. Somewhere in the image's journey across the internet, it became separated from its creator. The context disappeared. Someone, no one knows who, though many have tried to trace the origin, attached the date 1897 to the image. Perhaps they genuinely believed it was old. Perhaps they thought the fabricated backstory would make it more compelling. Perhaps they simply wanted to see how far the story would spread. It spread everywhere. The photograph circulated on forums, blogs, social media platforms. It was shared, reposted, downloaded, and re-uploaded until the quality degraded and the source became impossible to trace. The caption evolved. Different versions appeared. Mermaid found on beach in 1897. Victorian mermaid photograph. Authentic mermaid corpse discovered 19th century. Each iteration moved further from the truth. This phenomenon has a name in media studies: context collapse. It describes what happens when information travels across different audiences and platforms, losing the original framework that explained it. An artwork becomes an artifact. A sculpture becomes a specimen. Fiction becomes history. Cabana has spoken about this in interviews. He knows his work circulates without attribution. He's seen the viral posts, the conspiracy videos, the forums where people debate whether his sculptures are genuine cryptids. He finds it both fascinating and frustrating, proof that his work succeeds in its realism, evidence that the internet strips meaning from everything it touches. The irony is layered. Cabana created his mermaids as homages to historical fakes, gaffes made by people trying to deceive. His transparent, artistic practice became opaque again through digital circulation. The sideshow tradition of manufactured mystery was resurrected not through his intention, but through the internet's structural inability to maintain context. When you understand this, the photograph changes. You can look at it now and see the artistry in the construction, the careful attention to anatomical plausibility, the way the materials have been weathered and aged to suggest long exposure to salt and sun. You can appreciate the craftsmanship required to build something that photographs this convincingly. But millions of people who have seen this image don't know any of that. They see what the caption tells them to see: a mermaid corpse photographed in 1897. The myth has traveled further than the truth ever will. The debunking articles exist. The reverse image searches eventually lead back to Cabana's name, but the correct information spreads slowly, inefficiently, while the mystery replicates itself endlessly. This is not unique to the mermaid photograph. The internet is full of decontextualized images, videos, and stories that have been separated from their origins and given new meanings. Art becomes evidence. Satire becomes news. Fiction becomes folklore. The 1897 mermaid is not from 1897. It is not a mermaid, but it is real in a different sense. A real object, photographed in real light, constructed from real organic material by a real person with real skill. It exists. You could, theoretically, go see it. It occupies physical space in the world. The creature in the photograph was never alive, but the photograph itself is very much alive, mutating and spreading, accumulating new stories and believers with each iteration. Juan Cabana created a sculpture. The internet created a legend. To understand why the photograph convinced so many people, you need to understand how the creature was built. The process matters. The materials matter. Every detail that makes the image believable exists because an artist made specific choices about construction and composition. Juan Cabana's workshop is where biology and fabrication intersect. He works with the raw materials of taxidermy: preserved skin, cleaned bones, structural forms. But his goal is not to preserve what existed, it's to construct what didn't. His mermaids and sea monsters are assembled from components that once belonged to real animals, now reconfigured into impossible anatomies. The base of most of his creations is fish. Not surprising, given that he's building aquatic cryptids, but the choice is more practical than thematic. Fish skin, when preserved and dried, develops exactly the texture you see in the photograph, that leathered, parchment-like surface with visible scale patterns beneath the decay. It stretches over bone in a way that suggests dehydration and long exposure to the elements. It looks old, it looks found. The skeleton beneath is composite. Cabana sources bones from various animals, selecting pieces based on size and shape rather than species. A rib cage might come from a small mammal, adapted and modified to suggest a humanoid torso. The skull structure is often the most complex part. He builds them up from fragments, sculpting and reinforcing until the proportions read as plausibly real, alien enough to be unfamiliar, but structured enough to suggest it once supported life. The tail is where fish anatomy dominates. He uses large fish carcasses, sometimes whole, sometimes sectioned, as the foundation. The transition from torso to tail requires careful blending. This is where the gaff makers of history often failed, where the seam between monkey and fish became too obvious. Cabana spends significant time on this junction, layering skin and tissue so the shift appears organic, as though this body grew this way, as though evolution produced this form. Steel armature runs through the entire sculpture, providing structural support and allowing the piece to be posed. This is invisible in the finished work, hidden beneath layers of preserved organic material, but it's essential. Without it, the weight of the components would collapse the form. The armature is what allows the creature to lie on its side, head tilted at that unsettling angle, one arm folded beneath the body in a pose that suggests both death and something that was once alive enough to move. Preservation is an ongoing concern. These sculptures are not static. They are made from organic material, and organic material continues to change even after it has been treated and stabilized. Cabana uses various techniques, borrowed from taxidermy and specimen, preservation, chemical treatments, controlled drying, sealants, to slow decomposition, but he also accepts a degree of ongoing decay as part of the work. His creatures are meant to look weathered, deteriorated, as though time has worked on them. The aesthetic he achieves is what some call grotesque realism. It occupies the uncanny valley between the artificial and the authentic. The creatures look wrong, but they look wrong in the way that real dead things look wrong, deflated, discolored, emptied of whatever made them vital. They don't look like movie props. They look like something that rotted. This is why the photograph worked. When people saw it, they didn't see clean Hollywood special effects. They saw the messiness of actual death, the way bodies break down, the way flesh desiccates and collapses. It triggered recognition on a visceral level. We know what dead animals look like, even if we've never seen this particular animal. The image aligned with that knowledge. Cabana's artistic intention was never to deceive in the traditional sense. He doesn't claim his work depicts real cryptids. He presents his sculptures as speculative specimens, objects from an alternate natural history. What if made tangible? His exhibitions include artist statements explaining the work's conceptual framework. He participates in interviews where he discusses his process openly. He is not hiding anything. But his work succeeds so well at its mimicry that once it leaves the controlled context of the gallery, once the photograph enters the internet's chaotic circulation, the artistic intention becomes irrelevant. The object in the image, looks real enough that people believe it is real. The craftsmanship meant to honor historical gaffes becomes the mechanism for creating new ones. There is something poignant about this. Cabana spent years developing the skills to construct these creatures. He studied anatomy, preservation techniques, historical methods. He sourced materials carefully, experimented with aging and weathering processes, refined his approach across multiple pieces. The merman in the photograph represents significant artistic labor. How did this supposedly world-changing discovery vanish from the historical record entirely? These are questions that should immediately undermine belief, yet people continue to accept the photograph as genuine, or at least as possibly genuine. The comments sections beneath videos and articles about the image reveal this pattern consistently. Even after the debunking information is presented, responses appear arguing that the truth might be more complicated, that perhaps the artist didn't create it, but merely photographed something real, that the establishment has reasons to suppress evidence of mermaids, that absence of historical documentation might itself be suspicious. This resistance to debunking isn't stupidity, it's psychology. The image possesses a quality that researchers studying belief and folklore call grotesque realism. It doesn't look like a fairy tale mermaid, beautiful, mythical, obviously fantastical. It looks like something that died, decomposed, and washed ashore. The emaciated body, the visible ribs, the desiccated skin, the hollow eye sockets. These details don't invite wonder so much as uncomfortable fascination. This is what lends the photograph its persuasive power. It looks like what we imagine a real mermaid corpse would actually look like. Our cultural conception of mermaids has always contained this duality. The beautiful sirens of mythology exist alongside the grotesque specimens of sideshow tents. We're drawn to both versions, but in different ways. The beautiful mermaid represents fantasy and enchantment. The grotesque mermaid represents the possibility that fantasy might intersect with reality in disturbing ways. This photograph activates that second impulse. There's also the factor of aesthetic authority. Black and white photography carries an implicit suggestion of age and authenticity in our visual culture. We associate it with historical documentation, with a period before digital manipulation became commonplace. Even though we intellectually know that black and white filters can be applied to any modern photograph, the aesthetic still influences our perception. The image reads as old, and old photographs are presumed to be more trustworthy than contemporary ones. The setting reinforces this impression. The creature lies on bare sand under an overcast sky, photographed from above in harsh, flat light. This is exactly how field documentation photography looked in the early 20th century, before sophisticated camera equipment, before concerns about aesthetic composition. It appears utilitarian, meant to record rather than impress. That apparent lack of artistry makes it seem more credible. But beyond these visual factors lies something deeper, the enduring human fascination with mermaids themselves. These creatures have persisted in mythology across cultures for thousands of years. Ancient Assyria had mermaid deities. Greek sailors told stories of sirens. Medieval maps marked dangerous waters with illustrations of merpeople. Every culture with access to the ocean has generated some version of this myth. Why? What psychological need do mermaids satisfy? They represent the boundary between known and unknown. The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet's surface, yet we've explored less than 20% of it. The deep sea remains genuinely mysterious in ways that almost no terrestrial environment still is. We've mapped the surface of Mars in greater detail than we've mapped our own ocean floor. That vast, unknown space invites speculation. If something strange exists anywhere on Earth, it would be there, in the depths we haven't reached. Mermaids also embody transformation and liminality. They are neither fully human nor fully animal, neither land creatures nor sea creatures. They exist at the threshold, in the space between categories. This resonates with something fundamental in human consciousness: our awareness of our own dual nature, our capacity for both civilization and wildness, our existence at the boundary between the natural world and something separate from it. The image of the desiccated mermaid corpse speaks to these deep currents of meaning. It suggests that the boundary might be more permeable than we think, that the impossible might occasionally wash ashore, that the vast unknown might occasionally yield its secrets, even if those secrets are disturbing rather than beautiful. I won't ask you to believe that everyone who shares this photograph is consciously thinking about liminality and the unknown. Most people probably just think it looks weird and interesting, but the reason it looks interesting, the reason we stop scrolling when we see it, connects to these deeper patterns. The image activates ancient circuitry in our brains that responds to mystery, to the suggestion of hidden worlds, to the possibility that everything we think we know might be incomplete. This is why debunking often fails to kill a myth. Knowing that Juan Cabana created this sculpture doesn't address the emotional need that the myth satisfies. The need remains even after the specific piece of evidence is discredited. And so the photograph continues circulating, continues convincing people, continues generating that moment of wonder and uncertainty when someone encounters it for the first time. We want to believe, not because we're foolish, but because believing feels better than not believing. The world where mermaids might possibly exist is more interesting than the world where they certainly don't. And a photograph that suggests, however falsely, that impossibility might be real, offers us temporary residence in that more interesting world. The photograph has been debunked, Juan Cabana identified as its creator, the materials analyzed, the technique explained, the timeline corrected by more than a century. And yet, the image continues to circulate. I've watched it reappear on social media every few months, always with the same caption, always generating the same mix of wonder and argument in the comments. Someone will post the debunking link. Others will ignore it. Within days, the photograph surfaces somewhere else, the cycle beginning again. This persistence reveals something more interesting than whether mermaids exist. The 1897 mermaid has become what folklorists call digital folklore, a modern legend that exists primarily through electronic transmission. It follows patterns researchers have documented across countless viral stories. An image stripped from its original context, assigned a more compelling narrative, then spread through networks of believers and skeptics, until the myth achieves a kind of independent existence. What makes this case particularly striking is that the artwork and the legend have merged into a single cultural object. Cabana created a physical sculpture meant to evoke historical sideshow gaffes. The internet transformed it into an actual historical mystery. The result is something neither artist nor audience intended, a collaborative fiction that thousands of people have shaped through sharing, debating, and recontextualizing. The photograph succeeds as a modern myth for the same reasons the Fiji mermaid succeeded in 1842. It doesn't look like fantasy. The creature in the image is grotesque, deflated, damaged by time and decomposition. It matches our unconscious expectations of what a real mermaid corpse would look like. Not beautiful, not magical, but biological. Mortal. Something that could actually wash up on a beach somewhere. This aesthetic realism gives the image credibility that more obviously fantastical mermaid depictions lack. We've been conditioned by nature documentaries and marine biology to recognize the visual language of genuine specimens. Cabana's sculpture speaks that language fluently. The fabricated 1897 date adds another layer of plausibility. Not contemporary footage that could be easily verified or debunked, but old enough to exist in that murky historical territory where documentation is spotty and verification difficult. The Victorian era carries associations with exploration, exotic discoveries, and less rigorous scientific standards. Exactly the period when something like this could have been found and subsequently lost to history. But I think the deepest reason this image persists is simpler than technique or timing. We want it to be real. The ocean remains one of the last genuinely mysterious places on Earth. We've mapped its surface, but explored perhaps 5% of its depths. New species are discovered regularly. Giant squid, once considered mythological, turned out to exist. Colossal squid, even larger than that. The ocean has a documented history of hiding things science insisted were impossible. Mermaids represent a specific kind of possibility, not just an unknown animal, but something that bridges the boundary between human and other. Something that would fundamentally alter our understanding of our place in the natural world. The desire for that discovery runs deeper than rational skepticism can reach. Juan Cabana's sculpture has become a mirror. What we see in that photograph isn't evidence of mermaids. It's evidence of our relationship with mystery, our need to believe that the world still contains wonders we haven't cataloged and explained. The artwork has succeeded beyond its original intention by becoming a vessel for that ancient longing. The 1897 Mermaid isn't a hoax in the traditional sense. No one is selling tickets or making money from the deception. It's something stranger, a collective dream that manifests through digital sharing, a story we keep telling ourselves because some part of us refuses to accept that every mystery has been solved. The photograph is not a lie. It's a story that has been retold and reshaped by thousands of hopeful strangers across the internet. It's not a relic of a bygone era, but a testament to the enduring power of myth in our modern, digital world. Juan Cabana created an artwork inspired by historical sideshow traditions. The internet transformed it into a contemporary legend. The result reveals something profound about how we create meaning in the age of information, how an image can become divorced from its origin and assigned a new identity that spreads faster than facts can follow. The real mystery was never what washed up on a beach in 1897. The real mystery is our unending need to believe, even when we know the truth. It's the part of human nature that compels us to share the photograph one more time, to argue in the comments, to feel that small spark of a wonder before skepticism reasserts itself. The ocean keeps its secrets. We know this rationally. The depths remain largely unexplored, new species discovered each year, vast territories unmapped and unobserved. But emotionally, we know something else. We know that standing at the shore and staring at the horizon, some part of us will always wonder what's out there. The 1897 Mermaid photograph persists because it gives form to that wondering. It offers a glimpse of a world where the impossible turned out to be real, where something extraordinary emerged from the depths and left evidence behind. That evidence is false, but the longing it represents is genuine. Perhaps that's the real truth buried in this case. Not whether mermaids exist, but why we continue to seek mysteries even in an age when information is instant and verification is simple. The photograph survives because mystery itself survives, lodged somewhere deeper than reason can reach, waiting for the next strange image to surface and make us wonder all over again.